Very space.
How are you?
You bet. I'm Marcel Shaw. I'm the faculty of feminist studies here, and I'm associate professor.
Nice to meet you. And I'm Jenny Quinn, and I'm with Siddle. So I work with Jody Green and Kendra. So nice to meet you.
This year, so that we help you guys.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it less, I mean, there probably be some.
Even more.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, we have coffee, tea, and ice. We want to make ice. Yeah, so right over here.
How are you? Good. How are you?
Oh, it's so boring. Oh my God. It's sweet.
When you're ready.
everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge also our virtual audience who is joining us online. So the purpose of this presentation for this time around is we're going to be focusing on the interactive theater component of the HSI initiative. Specifically, our work is titled Interactive Theater Strengthens Social Humility in Advising Through Messages of Monuments. I'll have my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Sanchez and I am the Assistant Director for Advising for HSI Initiatives here at UCSC.
And hello, my name is Andrew Jones. I'm the pronouns he is, and I serve as the African Black Caribbean Teaching Specialist, and I work between the Resource Center as well as the.
Okay, so towards the end of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity to do question and answers. I know that we have a virtual audience joining us as well, so we'll have a platform for those joining us virtually to also ask questions for us. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we'd like to do is we'd like to remind you of the mission of the Division of Student Success on our campus. So the Division of Student Success has placed out this very specific mission, saying that we have a commitment to promoting equity, inclusion, and a sense of well-being for all of our students, and that our mission is to support the development of the whole student using research-based, innovative best practices to enable UC Santa Cruz students to thrive academically, professionally, and personally. Now, in addition to that, one very important thing to keep into consideration is that the Division of Student Success also acknowledges an institutional responsibility to certain students. And it says that students are not the sole responsibility, that student success is not the sole responsibility of the student, but that it requires alignment with campus policies, processes, and ensuring a positive climate with adequate resources available to our students, particularly those at highest risk. And efforts must occur at all levels of the university, be coordinated and mutually reinforcing. Okay, so the reason why I think it's very important to remind ourselves of this mission is because when we start talking about the specific features of the Multicultural Advising Conference, how we evaluated it, we also need to think about more structurally the implications that it has on the university. The Multicultural Advising Conference is one component of a larger, broader initiative on this campus. So it's important to keep in mind about how the Multicultural Advising Conference informs the campus as a whole. Okay, so another important thing to keep into consideration is that within the HSI initiatives, we make a very purposeful effort to make sure that practitioners are well informed and that they're prepared to make decisions that are going to lead to optimal student outcomes. What you're seeing here, I won't go through the specifics of it, but this is an adapted image from Alicia Dowd and Estela Ben-Simon, some of the major pioneers of theoretical frameworks for higher education. And basically what they're saying is that we must engage in an inquiry, in a cycle of inquiry, and that we must engage with practitioners to question the practices that we do on a day-to-day basis that then lead to student outcomes, which can be retention, graduation, and so on. Okay, so within the HSI initiatives, specifically within the data and evaluation unit, we think that it's very important to have a clear definition about what equity means for us. We don't just want to do this work in silos, and we don't want to do this work without really having a clear sense of what it is that we're trying to establish. So the definition that you see up here was a composite of some of the literature that we read in our unit. Specifically, we're taking the database in 2015, Gutierrez 2002, and Rodriguez 1998 to say that equity means the inability to predict students' achievement and participation based solely upon characteristics like race, class, ethnicity, gender, beliefs, and proficiency in the dominant language. And we believe that when we can no longer detect or predict student outcomes, such as GPA, graduation, retention, based solely on these markers, then we will achieve parity. Ultimately, equity in education is not just an abstract goal, but an ongoing process, a process that consciously entails the empowerment of practitioners to be agents of change. Okay, so With this in mind, and with our theoretical framework in mind, and now having a clear sense about what the Division of Student Success on this campus is trying to do, about more the specifics about what side initiatives are attempting to accomplish. What you see here is a visual of the activities associated with the 3 HSI grants. We are going to be focusing on, we're going to be focusing specifically today on MAPA, the $2.6 million grant that we received in 2015, in the advising component. There are other components or themes. This one should say math, writing, sense of belongingness, and transfer. And then each one of these grants targets the specific activities to target each one of these themes. So we're going to be focusing on advising today. Okay. So the purpose of this is just to show you that there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with the HSI initiatives, but mainly the training of Multicultural Advising Conference is fitting within the advising point. Okay, now with any grant, the logic model is really the undercurrent of the grant. It gives you a sense of what you're trying to do, what the needs have been, the resources that you have on your campus, the activities that you're proposing, the outcomes, the short-term outcomes, long-term outcomes, and ultimately the institutional impact that it's to have. So this is the bedrock. This is fundamentally what we're trying to do with the HSI work. Now I'm going to then transfer or pass the mic over to my colleagues who are going to specifically talk about the logic model as it relates to advising. Yeah.
All right, so as already said, we're talking about the specifics of this particular aspect of the HSI initiatives and going through the logic model. So we're not creating this program or pretty much any program in a vacuum. So we're specifically using data and information that we've come across in order to decide, what do we need at this campus. So we started with the UQ's data. So if folks are familiar, the University of California Undergraduate Experience Survey that's given to all UC students. So there was some data there that was pertinent to this section as well. There was a campus town hall as well as research team going and delving in a little deeper, having some focus groups and gathering data from current students. All of our data related to early departure and who was in the range of early departure, as well as seeing gaps in time to degree for students of color. As well, thinking about what our resources are. So we looked at our needs. Our resources relate to, of course, first and foremost, the grant. So the MAPA grant is about advising. And then we have our kind of idea about the importance of advisor professional development and how that's something that as well advisors have been sharing that they need. And then lastly, kind of the composition of our group spans folks that do advising and folks that are kind of research and evaluators. And all 3 of us are on the team alongside a couple of other members of HSI initiatives.
Yeah, so what we set out to do as far as our main activity was to host a multicultural advising training for advisors on campus with the goal of having the majority of the advisors go through this training. That's what we set out to do in MAPA and the advising component. One thing to note is that as far as advertising and us speaking about this event also, we did talk about it as a conference and put it out there as a conference to the people, to their campus audience of advisors. This was partly a marketing strategy, talking about opportunity for professional development. What we come across sometimes as far as like required trainings and things that we have to do online, we really wanted to put the message out there that this was not something that people have done before. So we did want to call it a conference, and also for the aspect that attending our event was not a kind of like a pass-fail type of situation, that once you come to this, you suddenly have all the competencies that you need to be an advisor in a multicultural context on our campus. So that's just one thing to note. For this to take place, we actually contracted with a couple of different folks, including an individual who had done some consulting work previously with other UC campuses and the UC Office of the President. We also worked with the UC Berkeley Interactive Theater Group. They're the folks who helped us to develop our script. And that script was able to come to development after some additional research. We had those individuals come and participate in meetings, in focus groups with students and staff to gather information. In addition to those resources that Erin already talked about as far as the data that we had about what is advising look like on our campus, what are the situations that students find themselves in. And with that, they developed a composite of our campus. They put together these different stories and did a script, which was what was performed eventually. There was different editions, review of that script, a rehearsal before the first edition of our conference. We had the opportunity as far as the planning group to provide some last minute feedback for that implementation as well. And to date, we've had 3 editions of our Multicultural Advising Conference. In 2018, we had one in May and one in November, what we call a level 1 conference, which Erin will talk a little bit more about later. And then this past March, we also had a level 2 conference for the first time. As far as outputs, like I mentioned before, what we're looking at is the number of advisors who attend the training. For kind of framework within our logic model, that is the sequence that we were immediately following is who and how many people can we get to come to this.
And so that leads right into what our hopeful outcomes are for the conference. Short term, we were looking again, as Sarah mentioned, the actual number of advisors. So the hope was to have the majority of advisors on campus to participate. And as well, we talked about the number of meetings, as well as hopefully improving the experience of students in advising, as well as, because specifically the interactive theater is about responding to microaggressions. We wanted students particularly to experience that microaggressions in the advising space.
Yeah, and so with our longer-term outcomes or long-term outcomes, we want to, of course, see an increase in retention and persistence among our student population, specifically as was stated in the student success mission, our highest risk, our low income, our Latinx students. Also wanting to see an increase in graduation rates, and both with persistence and graduation, and not just have those numbers increase, but have the gap that exists in those numbers decrease as well. And then we wanted to also impact student sense of belonging. Their everyday lived experiences on our campus, feeling like they're part of this community, that there's not only students who support each other here, but that their advisors are also a source of support and encouragement for them.
And then after the completion of all 3 conferences, the hope is that there will be some institutional investments in the continuation of this conference, whether that be financial means or after the grant is over, or actual people participating and actually thinking deeply about the practices and how it impacts students, as well as whatever structural changes that are contributing to the negativity in the advising space. Hopefully, those things would be.
Okay, so Sarah and Erin have sort of touched on this already, but I just want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of how we've identified the problem to initiate the Multicultural Advising Conference. So there was an action research project led by Dr. Catherine Cooper and colleagues in 2014 that found that students were revealing how a disproportionate number of Latinx students were experiencing microaggressions within the advising context. So we just want to make sure that it's well understood that the MAC didn't just come out of nowhere. It came out from inquiry that was done back in 2014 that really made an effort to try to understand student experiences on this campus and to see where the issues were. So in that, in understanding that, now we are situating ourselves in the work of Hurtado and Carter from 1997, and we consider that understanding student sense of belongingness to be a really key to understanding how particular forms of social and academic experiences affect students from historically underserved communities or who have been marginalized in higher education contexts and so on. So this includes Latinx and minority students, which is ultimately what the Hispanic Serving Institution initiatives are trying to address. Okay, so before we proceed, I think it's important to give you some concrete definitions of what we're doing here. So interactive theater is a presentation form where the audience actively engages with actors. The citation that you see here is a citation to a study that has used interactive theaters in the training of practitioners in the medical field. So it has been used in other spaces before. In doing a literature review, I really didn't come across any really recent publications that use interactive theater within the educational space. So it is something quite innovative to keep in mind. Sense of belongingness, where we are defining it as the measure of an individual's perceived social diffusion in various environments, and we're borrowing from Boyle and Boylan. And then microaggressions are the subtle insults, verbal, nonverbal, and intervisual, that are often automatic and unconscious and are most often directed towards minority students. And then we're borrowing from the work of Solorzano and Cardoso in 2000. And microaffirmations are small acts that foster inclusion, listening, comfort, and support for people who may feel unwelcome in an environment. Okay, so moving forward, we believed that the Multicultural Advising Conference was an opportunity. And it was an opportunity to now bring advisors in. And we believe that advisors are really well positioned to affirm student experiences within the context of higher education. And because we believe that, it was our mission to empower advisors to be agents of change by the processes, so to speak, of what they were exposed to in the advising conference. And now I'm going to turn to my colleague Erin, who will describe the specifics of what actually went on at the conference to initiate that process.
So as Arnold mentioned, interactive theater is not something that originated through us or through this process, but something that is pre-existing. But specifically here, what makes it very unique is that it's about advising. It's about, it's based on scripts that are developed from experiences of students here on campus. And so within the level 1 experience, the scene that was developed from the focus groups was then acted out in front of the advisors. And we'll talk specifically about the day, the day's agenda. But overall, the scene is performed, and then the participants are then actually able to communicate with the actors in character. And they're able to ask questions about the experience that are in the scene, and to get a better understanding of the perspective of the students as well as the advisors. And then after that experience is over, they then have an opportunity to meet in smaller groups to talk about practice, to talk about the specific things that they can do in their advising practice to make sure experiences like those they saw in the scenario don't happen here at UCSC. And that's mostly facilitated by our consultant, and then in the smaller groups, we were able to have on the second go around have some facilitators who had been at the conference before. And then for level 2, we primarily wanted this experience to be for folks that had been to level 1 and had experienced the scenario, so they have some familiarity. But then this time, the hope was that they could place themselves actually within the scene. And so instead of just asking questions of the actors and character, they actually got the opportunity to respond to the students within the scenario. So they actually went on stage and actually talked to the students to show kind of what their approach would have been if they were in this situation with a student. There were some intense moments, but the hope was for them to have some very impactful experiences so that they could take those things away and maybe change if they needed to. And afterward, they were able to talk in small groups again, as well as kind of create kind of a laundry list of responses for microaggressive phrases. So Sarah will talk specifically about what's happening in the play.
Yeah, so our play is titled 179-35624. As I mentioned before, this was developed as a part of the different consultations and focus groups that we posted on campus. I'll ask a question to our audience here in person, but any idea what our title of the play refers to? Lydia?
Student ID.
It does. It refers to a student ID number. So maybe some ideas are going through your head about what is happening here. But we had 4 characters. Karen was a comparative literature undergraduate advisor. She'd been in her department for 3 months, or 30 years old. Sergio Gonzalez was a transfer student, a senior who also had a part-time job, was a proposed computer science major, and he was 23 years old. Alejandra Williams was a last quarter super senior, a re-entry student, a working single mother, working on a BA in urban design, 28 years old. And then our 4th character was Keith Wren. That was a computer science undergraduate advisor. He had been in his department for 4 years and was 28. And what our advisor participants saw before actually seeing the play acted up on stage was the following synopsis. It says, Sergio, a proposed computer science major, goes looking for an advisor at 5:15 p.m. on Thursday, following the advice of his peer and roommate, Alejandra. Sergio finds Karen, the undergraduate advisor at the Department of Comparative Literature, but Sergio's assigned advisor is Keith at the Department of Computer Science. Sergio's student ID number is 179-35624. So that's how this is set up for our audience. We have a lot of different interplays happening here. Transfer students, we have re-entry students, single mother, advisors from 2 distinct departments, students seeking advising at a time which might be considered after hours. Again, in different pieces were taken from experiences on our campus to put this together. Itself, the scene was no more than 15 minutes long. It was brief. It was just 1 act. And as Erin talked about, right after that, the characters remained in character and could engage with our audience member of advisors.
Now, if we shift to think about the evaluation and the means by which we evaluate math, we started with a pre-survey that kind of gave us a better sense of kind of the needs of this program. And so I'll read one. We'll each read one or a few of the quotes directly from the advisors. So the first says, I'm interested in learning how to best support the intersectionality of our students and how to best convey my appreciation for the similarities and differences they bring to their peers.
I heard from several students that support for students of color and financially underprivileged students is generally lacking in the graduate program. I'd like to learn how to support and empower these students.
I am eager to gain better insights to support our students' diverse needs with humility and heart. While I have my own personal background and previous trainings to draw from, I believe it is extremely important to continually evaluate the advising methods being used.
Okay. So to continue to paint the picture of the day, again, we had the pre-evaluation, the pre-survey.
I'm sorry, I just wonder, were advisors required to be at these, or did they volunteer?
It was voluntary. Yep, voluntary participation. So let's talk about that. This event, this Multicultural Advising Conference that took place. Days, times, locations, all had to be, of course, planned out in advance. We consulted with some of our lead academic advising just leaders on campus to try to target days and times that would work the best for the advising community. Word went out on different listservs for the first edition. We also, tried to get buy-in from department managers and assistant deans from the different departments as well to just encourage people within their areas to attend. It was a registration online, no cost to the participants. And this went out to undergraduate advisors, also went out to graduate advisors with just the kind of, not warning, but just advising them that this was a scenario of undergraduate advising, but they were still welcome to attend. We had people from registrar, financial aid, a lot of our student success division areas, their staff, counselors, or program coordinators have also attended any one of the editions. That registration process allowed us to also do seating arrangements in advance, where we purposely mixed up the individuals sitting around the table. We had the great help of some different interns within our offices, and that's a task we assigned to the interns. It's kind of nice because I probably know almost everyone who attended any one of these conferences or know of them. The intern does not, so they mix up the group so that people are engaging with different individuals throughout campus. Through the consultation with our consultants, we were also provided with tools and guides to create packets for everyone on the day of. So that's another process that took many editions of revising and feedback in order to present something for them to work with on the day of the conference. Day of, we have some amazing folks helping us. They're actually here in the back who help us with a lot of our events, including the process just of registration and getting people in, who's here, who's not, who do we need to rearrange groups because one's too big, one's too small, whatever it may be. Thankfully, we were able to provide some refreshments and then push on that pre-evaluation, have them do that before we actually deliver any content. The day of, it's varied between level 1 and level 2, anywhere from 3 to 4 hours that we're asking people to spend with us. So going through registration, a brief welcome. Typically then it goes into the scenario, that dialogue with the characters in level 1, or that actually intervening with the characters in level 2. A large group discussion facilitated by 2 of our consultants, with everyone kind of interacting, talking, small group work, and then conclusion, both telling them about the post-evaluation, inviting them to thankfully also being able to provide some lunch and a room for discussion for them.
Okay, so one of the specific goals in the grant is, as you saw, the logic model was to capture the number of individuals who are being served. So we set out a baseline, and this baseline up here of 95 advisors to be served on this campus was established through the collaborative effort between the HSI initiatives, including Sarah, Erin, the director of our HSI initiatives, and in collaboration with other constituents on the campus. And then basically what we just did is we tracked the number of participants that attended both the May conference and the November conference, and we compared it to our baseline combined. Okay, and so just so you understand more specifically who attended, Erin's going to go through basic demographics.
Yeah, so I won't belabor the point, but I just want to show some of these images so that you can see the racial demographics of the attendees. And that might as well give you a sense as well of what our advising community looks like. So you'll see that predominantly in attendance at the first conference were our advisors who identified as white, and that occupies about 36%. And then the next largest group is Hispanic Latinx with 23%. And then we have African American at 14, 2 or more at 17, and then sit down there 2%, and Jamaican 6%. And then for the November conference, we're at the largest group being actually Hispanic and Latinx at 38% and 18 folks. The white advisors at 6%, 17, and so on. And then we'll share as well the combined outlook of all of the sessions.
So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about cultural humility, this being another primary kind of theme and effort from our work with the Multicultural Advising Conference. So as far as cultural community in the advising context, similar to what was stated a little bit earlier about kind of that, where we're borrowing some of a framework from the field of medicine and public health, is actually applicable to the concept of cultural humility as well. Coming from work that has taken place within the doctor-patient dynamic. In our case, we're transitioning that or transforming that into work with the advisor-student dynamic. But cultural humility refers to lifelong commitments to self-evaluation, critique, and curiosity in working with historically underserved communities. It's different than cultural competency. Competency is knowing a set amount of information, skills, knowledge. But with cultural community, it's not finite, it's ever evolving. There's always learning that has to and needs to take place. The learning, it happens in partnership with the students. They are involved as well. They are our teachers. We learn from them and we learn about them as part of our interaction and our advising work with them. It has to involve a relationship of mutual trust and care. So that also takes time and the right appropriate approach to take with students in advising interactions, which are some of the things that came out in our conference as well, as far as feedback that we've gotten from the advising community about their time and just effort that they're able to put in with students. It is also a challenge to the deficit view of historically underserved students because, as I'm trying to point out, the students are involved. They have agency. They bring something to the table. We don't have all the answers to their situation alone. We need to work with them in order to best serve them. And serving the students is also part of this framework. It's intentional. It involves processes and also practices. It is intended to meet the evolving needs of students and what is most urgent for students. So our students here on this campus now, what do they need now? What are their most pressing needs? That is one way that cultural community helps us to work with them, but also the students themselves, our populations change, whether it's our demographics, whether it be their interests, what is going on in the world influences them. But cultural community, again, because it's an ongoing process, allows for our work with those students to evolve also. And those practices that it includes listening, working together with the students, empathizing, encouraging, assuring, helping to advocate, expressing concern directly to students, and listening again.
Okay, so with the help of some other colleagues, Ethan Chan and Priscilla Sun, back in 2018, there was a cultural humility scale that was created that we used to evaluate the program. So specifically, advisors were asked the following questions. As an advisor, I am concerned about students' overall development as students. As an advisor, I assure students that they belong in college. I listen to the students have to say. I empathize with the challenges that students experience. We work together with students as a team. We encourage students to grow as a person, and I encourage students to speak frequently in their appointments, and ultimately I help students to be their own advocates. So when the Multicultural Advising Conference happened, there was a survey that was administered to the participants before and after. And what we found was that for the May 2018 conference, as well as for the November 2018 conference, the statistical significant gains were on, I assure that students that they belong in college, and I empathize with the challenges that students experience, and I encourage students to freely in their advising appointments. Keep in mind that whenever we do an evaluation of the project, there is the distal, the proximal and distal differences. So you look at the proximal differences right away, right at that point of the intervention. So you assess pre and post analyses. The distal effects are things that we are still yet to discover, which are the things about what advisors have taken from the Multicultural Advising Conference and have carried on into their practices more longer term. So we're still not there yet. We anticipate that possibly at some point we may ask the advisors to come back and we can get an assessment of what are the things that they've retained from the Multicultural Advising Conference that has persisted through their practices. Okay, this is.
So as we think about this model of using interactive theater in a conference format, thinking about what the advantages are, these 4 advantages we gathered from the sort of open-ended responses and from the data that Arnold just talked about. And so the humanizing aspect seemed to be a huge advantage in the use of this particular model. The ability to see the students as people as well, that they are not being pushed through those machines and just be spit out, that you want to have genuine care for the students and what they're going through, even if it's something that you yourself don't understand. The importance of engaging through dialogue with the characters. This opportunity allowed for greater understanding that that folks may not have had if they interacted with students and that interaction didn't go well. They can't go back and then ask them what happened or what didn't go well for you, the same way they could with the actors. And so as well, like I said, especially in, I think, level 2, this was a very kind of emotional and transformational experience for folks. They had never really seen or understood the ways that very small things can have a huge impact on the lives of a student, and they had that through this process in this conference. It's going to carry on with them longer. The hope is that it'll carry on with them longer after the conference is over. And then the last thing is really being able to witness the complicated, complex nature of student experiences in real life advising situations, and how the students bring in things to the advising session and they take things away from that advising session that may have nothing to do with their academic experience.
As part of our post-evaluation, we also again wanted to hear from the advisors, started to hear from the advisors what they were taking away, what they would do differently in their advising interaction. So we asked exactly for, write down here 2 things that you would do differently in your advising interactions, and they reported these themes of humanizing the students, being more personable, building rapport relations. If again we think back to our title of our play, right? And you might read this and say, well, I hope we treat students as humans, but we also treat them as they're part of statistics, they're numbers, that aspect. Another point was listening more attentively, checking out if students understood what we're telling them, what we're talking about, using constructive listening. They also jotted down being more aware of their own implicit biases and intent, also their impact, and then interrupting microaggressions. They would do more self-reflection, more intentional self-care, slow it down, take it one step at a time. And then they would utilize campus referrals and resources, be more open with their fellow advisors as part of their work. So from our two things that they would do differently related to that is 10 strategies to foster equitable and inclusive advising. There's a little bit of overlap between the two concepts, but based on the small group work that was done by the advisors at our first level 1 conference, our consultant was able to piece together this list of the 10 strategies to foster equitable and inclusive advising. It has become a new tool not only for us to use in our conferences and professional development with advisors, but something that we'll know that she'll take to other campuses and other institutions that she does work with. But what we have here, the list, it starts with number 1, be more aware of one's own impressions, assumptions, biases, and actions. Make sure that assumptions are checked out. Number 2, create a welcoming and inclusive environment.
Number 3, create a culture where a holistic developmental model of advising is realized to validate student experiences, be affirming, and work from student strengths.
5, listen for what the student needs. Number 6, build a rapport and relationship with each student.
7, take care of oneself, including investing in professional development to learn and grow on the job. 8, be open to and elicit feedback from students and acknowledge positions.
Explain and describe policies and processes to provide context and transparency. Streamline policies and processes to ensure that their impact do not affect students differentially. And then last, collaborate with your community of advisors for referrals, resources, and support.
Okay, so some of the major takeaways are that participants expressed the need to develop the ability in holistic advising through an intersectionality lens that acknowledges undergraduate and graduate students' multiple categories of identity, difference, and disadvantage. We know that 47% of UCSC campus-wide advisors, not including staff, participated in the May 17th conference. We know that 41% of UCSC campus-wide advisors participated in November 30th conference. And after attending the conference, participants reported an increase in microaffirmations to students, including messages of belongingness, empathy, and agency. And attendees identified the 10 advising strategies that you just heard to foster equitable and inclusive advising. The attendees of the November conference identified 2 things that they would do differently in their practices based on what they learned from the conference. Okay, so I'll touch on this briefly, but I just kind of want to wrap things up with this presentation. With the initiative that we have on this campus, we are very much focused on the sustainability of these types of interventions to bring about equitable practices for students. What you're seeing here is the process that we take as a unit, as a team, to try to interrogate issues that are affecting students. So first, we identify the problems as you saw through an equity data analysis, which is what Catherine Cooper and her colleagues were doing back in 2014. Then we went through the process of the experimentation problem solving, and then actions of developing the MAC, or the Multicultural Advising Conference. We have initial evaluations, and then we've adapted those experiences to then include them in the level 2 conference. And then we do subsequent multiple evaluations, and we acknowledge whether we can make certain sustainability claims or not. If we can't, we rethink the process and we start again. But one of the important things that has come out of this is the building sustainability through a community of practice, which Erin is the lead of.
So as we think about sustaining this effort and creating space where advisors can continue to interrogate their practice in a brave space to kind of come and talk and share and get support and help from other advisors who may be a little bit more experienced or not, but thinking about what's impeding the success of our students, and how can we as advisors come together to combat those issues. It's also a space for us to kind of have some informal debriefs of the MAC. And when I say MAC, I'm talking about either the conference or the community. And so the community is really this co-created space that allows for the advisors to talk about whatever they want. And sometimes that may be that this work is hard. It may be that There are structures and policies in place that are, making things difficult for me and difficult for me to really connect with students. And then there are other voices that can freely talk about how, yes, it's hard, but here's also our focal point, the students, and the importance of supporting them. So having those conversations, usually at some point after the conference, has been really important, and I think we've had some really great conversations. And having it be a facilitated dialogue, I think is important as well. I am a member of the community, but also I am someone who wants to have the space be open to kind of talk about whatever we need. And so I kind of take a slight step back, but I'm also a participant as well. So I can provide that advice or support just like all the other advisors. So I think this has been a really interesting experience to have folks experience this, have this shared experience, and also to come together and talk about it in more depth.
Okay, so just some closing remarks. So in this presentation, you had an opportunity to take a look at the programmatic features of the Multicultural Advising Conference, some of the takeaways from the advisors, some of the pre-post analyses that we've done. And then you've also gotten some exposure to the mission of the Division of Student Success on our campus. So what are the implications for the campus as a whole? This is a multicultural advising conference that happens it might happen like 2 to 3 times a year, more or less. It's a 2 to 3 hour conference. Well, what does this mean for the campus? And especially when we're specifically grounding it in our definition of equity. Well, we are arguing that the professional development of advisors is a way to embed structural changes that help us move from an ambiguous federal constructed identity as an HSI into a shared understanding of what it really means to serve Latinx and minority-type students at UCSC. And if we can embed these practices into our infrastructure, then we're one step closer to meeting or achieving parity as we've described in our definition. But until then, we have to keep working hard, and we need to keep interrogating the issues that affect our student population on our student populations on our campus. But we hope that the HSI initiatives are doing that through the practices that we engage in. And that was our last slide. The last there now. But if we have like 10 minutes for Q&A, if you have any questions that you may have, I know that there's folks joining us online. We have someone who will be reading the questions for us, or will be sharing the questions for us if you have any. So please ask.
Lydia has a question. I have 2 actually. So my first one is, why this? Of all the innovative things that you could try, why interactive theater?
That's a great question. So the question was, why did we choose the method of interactive theater? And I'm going to guess that was slightly before any of the 3 of us were involved. So at the point of the grant, and maybe Renee, you might have some insight into this, but at the point of the grant proposal, so the grant didn't say that our method would be interactive theater, right? The grant said provide professional development. My inclination is it was our director, Pablo Regading, might have been his idea. I'm gonna guess. Renee, do you have any more insight?
So I think that Pablo has some networks at UC Berkeley, and they've done similar things with the interactive group theater. So originally we had another idea, but then that kind of faded away because we were relying on certain collaborations on campus, so we weren't able to do that. So Plan B was really kind of thinking about what's something new that UCSC hasn't explored, and this interactive theater was an idea that we've seen at UC Berkeley. We had individuals that actually developed the script, and we had that partnership. So it was a little bit more easier in the sense that it's something that we kind of knew a little bit more about, and so there. Other than that, I think that's really where it stems from.
That's helpful. Can I ask my second question now? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Aaron, when you were talking about the sustainability pathway, and you said that advisors saying that this is hard. can you go a little bit more in depth? What exactly was hard?
Right. So I think some of the conversations have related to one, being an advisor is hard. Is given how things are structurally. For instance, when you think about college advisors and a ratio of advisors to students that they got, and the time period that they structurally are allotted to give to a student for an appointment. They express that is a stressor, and it is difficult to actually give students what they probably need most because of those limitations. There are ways to get around some of those things to set up a follow-up appointment at a later time, as faculty jump in, to do very small things about the construction of your office, the way that you greet students when they come in, and those types of things. And those are the things that have been developed through our conversations and through the strategies that we identified how to support students even within that constrained environment. And that's something for folks to learn from other advisors that they haven't necessarily been getting. And so to answer that question, like that's the predominant thing that has come up. It's about time.
Did policy at all come up about, and I speak to this because of my experience in engineering, obviously, and having to qualify for majors. One of the things that constantly came up for me is having to have those really hard discussions with students about you're in the beginning of your third year, and I'm sorry to say, but there's no way you can complete a robotics engineering major within the time allotted that the university gives you, right? It's in that construct. So I'm just wondering if that came up at all.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I would say pretty much everything has come up. Whether it be in the actual dialogues at the conference, and also the dialogues, in MAC. But I think a part of that conversation is how can we change it? What are the steps that can be taken? What are the things that other advisors are doing to still be able to support students? Still have a conversation about, yes, these policies say that, well, they restrict you from being able to pursue this major. Let's talk more deeply about what you really want to do. Not center it in this place of you can't do this now.
Which that goes back to time, right?
What else can you do? And more of a conversation of what are your strengths? What can you do? Are there loopholes to go around a particular policy? Are there ways that they can connect with faculty or talk with the faculty that they've had to get exceptions for certain things? Like it's a much longer conversation. And yes, it goes back in time to a certain extent. I think as well, and it happened in the stop me if I'm talking too much about it, and if you have anything to add, Sarah. But even in the first conference, folks were very, for lack of a better word, fixated on the advisor troubles and not really asking questions of the students or thinking about what the students were interacting with. And so we even went so far as to talk with our actors and really getting them to hone in more on the student experience so that the participants can recognize that the student issues are the issues that are centered here and not necessarily the advisory issues. Yes, they are a part of the larger scope of the problem, but if we don't focus on the student issues, we're not going to get to resolving the student issues.
Questions actually, as many as makes sense right now, but I wanted to ask, what was the role of college advisors? Were they participating in this, or was this just the departmental major advisors?
Yeah, it was college advisors were included. They were we have that detailed data in our documents and reports and all of that. So college advisors, department advisors, financial aid, registrar, student success. Also, just as word spread, or there, one of the primary listservs that we use has a lot of different areas on it, and people just came. Like we had people from all kinds of offices on campus who have, one or two people here and there who have attended. For the first edition, we did notice that we have less college advisors than we would have liked there, so we really honed in for the second level one on a day and a time. Also, we have to consider the day and the time, the week and the quarter that it is, what advising deadline is taking place, in order to make it even more accessible to the college advisors. And we did have an uptake in that population. Advisors attend the second edition of the level one.
So that I noticed in your charts that there was a huge drop off in African American advisor attendees from the first to the second. Do you have a reason, or it's like do you have some understanding of why?
Anecdotally, I can say that it's probably because there are not a lot of African American Black advisors on campus. I think also from 1 to 2, we lost advisors to other campuses and that left campus. And they're not counting me because I'm a part of the planning, so I'm not involved in any of those as well, but I was there for 3.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But it seems
that's what I can think of anecdotally.
It seemed to me that I wasn't sure the sort of follow-up between the 1 and the 2 sessions, like if it was a cumulative process or if it was repeating information. So I didn't know if maybe folks in the first one, you exhausted your outreach to who's available at Santa Cruz. In the first one, they didn't come to the second one because they had already gone to the first.
This was all level one, right?
Yes.
Level one, May 2018, and level one, November
Oh,
2018.
I see.
So there was some overlap because advisors, during the second invitation, I said the same scenario will be presented. I didn't say that if you attended before, you'd be excluded. So some people self-selected to register and attend again. So there was some overlap.
It was a very small number.
Very small overlap.
It was about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And then all the people that like returned for the second time around, we invited them to be facilitators. So their role was a little different. It was watching for the second time, and then also being able to hold dialogue with folks at the table. But just to your point of, I think not even just for African American Black advisors, I think advisors in general, there was kind of a large drop off in between, like, the first one and the second one. And so there were a lot of advisors who may have had similar roles as advisors that had participated the first time that were coming in. So looking at who all was there is kind of complicated. And we have to kind of look in depth at the specific demographics to answer it fully.
Yeah, what I can tell you though is that in May 2018, there were 7 college advisors. In November 2018, there were 15. Department affiliated advisors, there were 20 in May, and then there were 18 in November. And then related to student success, there were 18 in May, and then there were 9 in November. And the list just of other departments and other areas is smaller, like 1 or 2 from other places. Yeah.
I have more questions, but if other folks have questions.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, would you say, Arnold, that size was the right size for the delivery of this topic and discussion, or could you see it being larger, or what
I thought that it was, from a personal perspective, I thought it was a great size,
Okay.
especially because the tables had interactions within themselves too. So there were activities that you could interact with a table of 5, and it was diversified enough so that you had different folks at the table where you could engage in very constructive dialogue. I thought that it was great. It was very manageable in my opinion, and
If could say it's a perfect size, it's pretty much a perfect size. During any of the editions of the conference, we've turned no one away. Do encourage them registering and signing up, but whoever has said they want to come got a confirmation to come. So I think allowing it to happen a couple of different times is helpful instead of trying to get everyone in one place at one time. And thankfully, we've been able to offer it more than once also.
How many participants were at each one?
so we had 54 at the first one and 59 at the second. Yeah,
And
that includes advisors and some staff that attended them.
I want to know more about the microaggressions. So first, what were the kinds of microaggressions that students reported in the UQ data, or you focus groups or something? And then What were the kinds of things that are microaggressions that the script reflected?
Yeah, great question. So from the work of the UQ survey and from the work of Catherine Cooper, we know that microaggressions are localized in certain parts of the campus. We know that much. And one of the reports that comes from the UQ's data is that microaggressions were happening within financial aid space, within some colleges, and so on. The way that microaggressions were displayed in the play itself was not specific to a department. It was more general.
It was a bit more general. I think one was, I think a primary one though that did kind of stand out was about students in certain majors and why assumptions related to that one way or another. Why we think a student should be fit for one major and not another based on their own demographic characteristics. That can be one aspect, but also their academic trajectory. So that's one aspect that was played out in the script.
Kind of related to that, the character, the student, had the impression, or it came out through the scenario, they felt like certain students were being given information about opportunities while he was not. That he was being directed out of the major as opposed to being connected to resources that help support him to remain in the major. So it's like, oh yeah, you can tell other students to look for scholarships, to go to tutoring, do this and this, while you're telling me to leave the major. That is this the right major for me? And he perceived it to be related to his the piece of the ID. So multiple times within the scenario, this ID is kind of used as a point of identifying him and kind of not really asking, well, how are you doing? With hello, or to my office. What's your student ID? And then that being the first touch point to think about the student as opposed to kind of finding out who they are and what they're trying to do on campus, kind of going straight to that and looking at the academic records first before talking to them about it. So those are a couple things.
Name pronunciation, the students, the pronunciation of the student's name, I'd say is another aspect that was in there.
Are there any questions from the folks online?
No questions from online, but I did find a little bit more information on how we came to the interactive theater model. So Edith Yang, who kind of helped coordinate this, she served as the diversity and faculty development officer for the Office of the President, and she's done some studies or has worked at UC Berkeley and Cornell where they did interactive theater to improve campus climate. So looking at engineering and how do they work with faculty to improve that experience for students. So we do have some some research and papers where this interactive theater idea came from, and working with Edith and Michael, who developed the script, and really the foundation concept of the model was really based on their experience and seeing how they work with different departments to improve that climate. So we were hoping that we would be able to have that same impact that you see.
Any other questions?
I actually have one more. So I'm thinking about it like Arnold, and I always appreciate how you guys start your kind of introductions and talking about the mission and talking about that it's really the responsibility of everyone, including the institution. But one of the things that I'm thinking about is what, if anything, that that's happening with CITL or work doing this type of training with faculty. Anything that you could share?
Yeah. So basically, like what happened in some of the ripple effects more at the institutional level?
Well, just wondering if anything like this is going to be done for faculty as well.
Oh, okay. I have no idea.
There are currently not plans to do this for faculty.
Yeah,
is what I can say concretely right now.
Yeah.
It's been a question.
It's a popular question, popular idea.
I just to share, I've sat with faculty and shared with them just a a key point of information, and they were like, what? So they had no idea that 70% of our students are receiving financial aid. So what does that mean, right? And they were kind of like, oh, so that's why they can't afford a MacBook or whatever, you know what I mean, or fix their computer, right? So I don't know. It'd be great if we could see something like that, right?
Well, and Renee might speak a little bit to getting to know your students report, which is a one-on-one opportunity that we have with faculty. It isn't training like this. It isn't training, but it is information, and you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, so through the getting to know your student report, it's really an opportunity for us to kind of highlight the changing demographics within the courses. So we're looking at not only the ethnicity and race, we're looking at first generation, EOP, and gender. And during those conversations, I think that it does provide an opportunity for us to highlight just the different experiences that students come in with, depending on the types of courses that we're working with. So we are making some progress in that arena. I think that, but to your comment, as far as creating a more expanding the way that we're serving, that is a conversation that we've had, and also acknowledging how can we collaborate with CITL, how can we take advantage of certain trainings to, again, have another touch point where we are highlighting the different barriers that students have to face. So we are working, to give an example, for Math 2, we do a kind of a 2-day intensive summer training where we do work with math TAs. So again, this idea of inclusive classroom, changing demographics within the classroom, but how can they work to build those communities within their sessions so that they have start building those relationships. So they're challenging questions to have. They are, in some instances, it's an opportunity for us to bring awareness. So we are bringing awareness. But the question now is, how do we take that to the next step? And how do we provide professional development for faculty that are interested in developing a course or a community within the courses to eliminate some of those barriers. Yeah, because some people don't understand what UOP means, they don't understand what first generation means. So when Jenny and I are going to these meetings of getting to know your students and what the demographic looks like, those are an opportunity for us to bring some of those experiences.
And just as a point for the record, Juan Poblete, who is on the HSI grants, is in one of the sessions and very much enjoyed it, and as well kind of spoke to his praises as to something potentially for faculty to better understand the students, but specific to situations that would happen with faculty.
Right.
And I think as well, just piggybacking as well off what Renee said, that this is the beginning of a lot more conversations. There's difficulty in trying to get faculty to do something or require them to do anything, but like really having them have a great understanding of the benefits of this is really well.
It's okay to continue. I mean, I in the calendar it was until 3:30.
Yeah, sorry, I thought it was, yeah.
So I
It's still 3:30.
I just want to take this opportunity to
Yes.
open up the conversation with us. You know, to think about like where different people around the table and stuff like that. But I mean, I have to say I was a little surprised at the content because I mostly just read the big headline, promoting student success through inquiry practice. So I thought it would be a lot more of a like a community engagement, collaborative learning model, which you know it's not, you know, it just wasn't what I was expecting. And so I mean I guess I just want to register that I personally as a faculty member very interested in having more opportunities to talk about that, especially as it relates to HSI. But also I'm in my role as associate provost folks. I'm working with Provost Langhout to develop a really good model for how community engagement and you know collaborative learning processes can actually be positive impacts on retention and graduation. So Gina has done some of that research and has a review. I'm sure Fatima Raja is working with us. We're meeting with Pablo recently. But you know, to kind of continue the conversation. But I wonder if other folks had the same expectation that I had, or maybe wanted to talk a little bit about where they're interested in seeing initiatives go. That we can bring to.
Well, Olivia was asking her question. I had the same question. How do you transport this work that really addresses advising to redefine what does it mean to be an instructor? Isn't there an advising component for every instructor? So I see this work very much informing my own context as assessment and equity analyst and specialist, and would be interested in knowing if you can imagine a way that the work you're doing could be recorded at least or made available to faculty who would like to hear what do these conversations look like?
We did have several conversations about recording, at least probably not the dialogues amongst the advisor, but at least the scene itself. It just didn't, in the last moment, did not come to fruition. But if we do it, if we perform it again, I think we will record it. As far as where we're at with our planning team, we're still meeting on a bi-weekly basis. We are at a point where we are evaluating now the data of the level 2 conference and our responses. We have the next edition of our multicultural advising community of practice coming up the first full week of May, where Erin is going to get feedback from them on their most recent experience. So we're in a kind of analysis point about what to do next. This is also the second time we speak about the Multicultural Advising Conference to an audience somewhat like this. We were just at a conference earlier in the week, and the theme about doing this for faculty also came up. The fact that it came up here, I think that is also something for us to take back, and maybe that could be our next step. And as I said to that audience on Tuesday or Monday, I forget when we presented, Tuesday, it would be different. We would get a whole new set of focus groups and meetings and data collection and script development and do a composite, I would say, of faculty, whether it be, I have an idea, it could be maybe not for 2 full scenes, but maybe something in the classroom and something kind of office hours or advising related also.
Something that would be beneficial, at least in your capacity, kind of helping us, how can we get that buy-in? Because oftentimes that is the biggest challenge. We see with the advisors in which we were able to connect with the advising community and provide it, or at least offer it as an option. But as we're talking about faculty engagement, through SEMIA, we have the teaching and learning community where we bring in faculty that are teaching daily courses, and provides an opportunity for us to build that community, share best practices between those faculty. So thinking about how can we expand that kind of community across disciplines, and ultimately comes down to how do we create a program that faculty want to get engaged in, that they will commit their time to, and really have that buy-in. I think so. We're always happy to kind of get some insight, especially knowing your division and unit. How can we create a program that will attract that kind of engagement? Because there is some interest, but not everybody wants to acknowledge or acknowledge that they don't have the skill set to work in a diverse classroom, or really face the reality that things are changing, and how can we help facilitate that?
I can speak to that.
Oh, yeah.
Over time. But I think I've been faculty in the social sciences and humanities, and I've also been the core faculty of the program in the arts division, so I'm familiar with the institutional culture of those 3 divisions, not other divisions. But what I would say is that, especially in the arts and humanities, you have faculty culture that is highly suspicious of administrative institutional kind of initiatives. So they really often think that the administration is slow to address questions. I think I've heard a lot of faculty, working on affiliated faculty with Latin American studies. I've definitely heard faculty express the idea that we've been getting this program And now it's like, now that there's federal money attached, like, okay, now people are getting interest, right? Which is not true of like the people in this room, but I think in terms of like how the institution looks at HSI, like, yeah, we work with Latinx communities for decades because it's important to us. But you know, I'd say in social sciences, people are a little bit more willing to reach out and work through the programs, and I see a lot more engagement, especially when people are working on kind of research and community work, so getting more support for that. But like humanities faculty would just be like, we know how to do it. And so, but at the same time, I've heard them express really serious, you know, concerns about like feeling like they notice things changing in the university. They want, you know, they welcome the change, but at the same time, they're facing specific instructional challenges that are important. And I think that our sites for microaggression, particularly around language instruction, you know, and not just the writing program, which I think is its own thing, that could also be a place to. But I think it might be one of the more accepted places to do something like this, right? The writing program. But actually, those of us who are teaching our position, you know, and some of the department courses, right? So there's a real bifurcation between those things. So I hear a lot of my colleagues saying, and this is not because of the HSI thing, this is probably just a generational thing, but what's going on with people's writing skills? I had a new colleague who just recently posted on Facebook, being shocked that people are, you know, students are calling like every book a novel, right? And so it's like a completely different way of understanding, like, and relating to the written word, right? Than what, of course, people who have gotten PhDs and have been around for several decades or even just got here. So I know that there are moments where practice is expressing this observation, wanting tools, but I think you have to actually be very conscious. I think Civil is an excellent place to develop this, because I think especially humanities faculty have a lot of trust in Civil. So I would definitely partner and make those things available. I don't know if you have any ideas about what the word is.
I think it's really important in the cross campus, because there's so many initiatives and things coming from so many different directions. And it's not landing well for staff, for faculty, as far as time constraints. And it's duplicating efforts in different venues, but duplicating efforts, and it needs to be better coordinated. And it's not at you, it's campus efforts in general needs to be more centered and better coordinated. And it's really, I know for staff, it's a huge time sink, and all these different initiatives coming down. And you know, the desire for professional development is there, but we're not given any more hours a day. So, and I know there is definitely, I'm glad you raised it, I know there's definitely a desire on the faculty side for more information as well. So again, instead of just having, you know, HSI, you know, international students and all these other groups, they're all, you know, making great efforts, and it's all very much appreciated, but it's all coming scattershot. And it needs, you know, some better coordination top down would help us all, and would also help integrate the different groups, you know, together as well. So.
And I want to ask a question of my oh, you go.
Okay, hi, I'm Andrea Cohen. I work on a lot of different projects, and actually Lydia invited me, so thanks for having me. I work in academic affairs, and my current project is strategic academic planning. So use that material, and I hope we'll look at the material as it comes out again. And that's my little pitch. And but the like, so I keep wondering, so you've been successful at offering this conference to help the advisors across campus engage and learn from one another and grow together. And I am so curious, like, what's the sort of expense associated with that? And you know, my guess is it, aside from, you know, your valuable time and the valuable time of the individual and maybe your consultant, I mean, it's probably pretty small, really, like in the scheme of expensive things, right? Like it's not a new IT infrastructure thing, you know, that might be a lot. And so I feel like if the community is able to make some strategic investments in a collaborative, coordinated fashion so that faculty are involved somehow, and I would say even grad students involved somehow, because a lot of that learning and that instruction happens there as well, those interactions with students, seeking advice from people who are maybe a little closer to them. So I'm just so curious about those pieces.
Yeah, it sounds like we have a starting of a good task force thinking about, because I mean, there's definitely a need.
There is, yeah.
So and we have a model, we try to look advising, so that as we think about the future of our efforts, it's worthwhile having a conversation. This is how it started with advising. We tapped into all the units providing advising, kind of getting a sense of what are you seeing that we're not, and starting that conversation. So it might be worthwhile that Sarah, along with her team, have that conversation and see whether the group implementing the interactive model can, what are their experience with this kind of work, because they've done it where they work with this kind of model with faculty and instructors. But then the question is, what example are we going to provide? Because something that's humanities is probably totally different from STEM, or
Yes.
vice versa. So kind of thinking about how do we even start prioritizing where we start. So it might be that's the next step for us.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting for the conversation we've had and where we might head. Yeah, especially at a point where we are at a crossroads. Like, where do we go? Where do we go from here? Our objectives have been met. It's a number. It's an N of number of advisors who attended your training. But we have been able, and in some regards, Andrea, you spoke to the budgetary. I think we've been able to do it because there was a budget line and we didn't spend it all the first time. So we've been able to do it a couple other times too.
I think the two big groups, advisors, or, on the department program level, advisors, student advisors and faculty, but there's also a lot of other staff who really interface with students in that role. CAPS, there's just a lot of different people, a lot of different staff on campus that would welcome, learning more and developing skills and how to do their communication better. But it's not just, you hit two big groups. The other thing about the advisors is there's been, in the past 3 years, there's been almost 100% turnover. So it's great that you're hitting these groups, but it needs to be hopefully something that can be on our website or presented annually or part of regular, advising folks have several annual events and,
There's the advising conference.
Like the advising conference
That
and having
all the advisors should be going to.
right, and having a part, partnering with those events and those different groups too. So, there's lots of opportunity.
What percentage did you guys hit with the attendees of advisors on campus?
From the baseline?
Well, so there's like a certain number of advisors on campus, right? I don't know what that number is. So what percentage actually attended?
So there was, like, I don't know, not a survey, but the number of advisors on campus was a number. Like, that number was determined. Like, that's the number that we do use and used as a baseline. Like, from that point, we also know about the turnover and know this, got one advisor here or 50% there. But we did have that baseline number.
Which was 97.
97, 92.
It was all over the slide.
Yeah.
So it's the one on the.
So you had like 100% show up?
Yeah.
Technically, yes. But that baseline number was done years ago, a couple of years ago at least.
So it's going to fluctuate based on the time that was created.
There are very few advisors who have not.
But that is also true.
Well, I'm one of them. That didn't. Yeah.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I didn't. And for me, the reason I didn't go was because I just didn't have the time. But I made sure that our MEP counselor went.
Yeah. But yeah, that's why there was such little overlap between the level 1 first edition and level 1 second edition. And then when we did the level 2, the question was, oh, do we require that they have come to level 1? And we, most of them did, right? And whoever this was going out to, target audience, most of them had come to a level 1. But there was actually a handful who it was their first occasion that they came to, because we have new advisors on campus too.
Some people said something to the effect of like, I've been here like 3 months. That's how these are taking place.
Yeah.
Taking place.
I think something that you said that was really important about it, I really encourage you to keep leading with this, is that when you talk about not being both the community and the actual conference itself, I think that's really key to what, the longevity of something like that, and to having advisors feel like they've been through something that that they're part of, and that is an ongoing resource for them to actually, come to this problem and, express like concerns about, well, this student came in with this profile, I didn't want to turn him away, but it was after hours or whatever, like how do I deal with things better or whatever.
So we do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I just want to make sure everyone has 3:30. Thank you so much for coming, for joining us. We have another talk next month, so please look up the invitation for that. And we look forward to our future conversations together.
Awesome. Thank you.
So then who wants to take the coffee to go?
Yeah.